back, everyone. Tonight I've put together a compilation of shorter encounters. I want to thank all these individuals for sending these stories, and I also want to thank all of you for stopping by to listen. I appreciate your continued support here on the channel, and I hope everyone out there is staying safe and blessed beyond measure. That being said, let's get into tonight's encounters. Grab a drink, lock your doors and windows, hit the lights, and let's get started. Newton, Iowa, 2019. I'm a native here in central Iowa. I have been my whole life. Our family's farm sits on about 80 acres of corn and soybean fields, backed by a stretch of dense timber. I was never afraid of the woods even at night until the summer of 2019. That evening I was finishing up some repairs on the barn when I noticed something unusual out by the trees. It was probably about 100 yards away, just beyond the last row of crops. I just happened to notice something big and black standing there motionless. It was standing upright like a person would, and it was extremely still. The longer I stared, the more uneasy I got. I only watched it for about 10 seconds when it finally moved for the first time. Once it started moving, that's when I was able to make out the shape. This thing was extremely tall, and its whole body was covered in a dark brown fur. There was no misidentifying the shape of its head. It was unmistakably canine. This thing wasn't just aimlessly wandering around. It was standing there and it was watching me. And God knows how long it had been there watching me. I just happened to notice it out of sheer luck. Or would you even call that luck? I just continued watching it, trying to figure out what it was. At one point I started to think it could be a person. It was just too big. Then, as if to confirm my worst fears, it cocked its head to one side, giving me a perfect view of it. It looked just like a German Shepherd, except German Shepherds don't stand 7 feet tall. I started sidestepping my way back to the barn, but I wanted to keep my eyes on that thing to make sure that it didn't get out of my sight. The whole time, it just stood there and never moved. The second I reached the barn doors, I turned around and slammed the latch shut. I always kept an old hunting rifle out there, so I grabbed it, and by the time I got back out the door and looked, I didn't see it anywhere. For the next couple nights, I heard some strange howling near and sometimes on my property, but I never saw that thing again. The woods around my place just never felt the same after that, even though I've experienced nothing else weird since then. Thank you. Anonymous. 2007, near Pecos, Texas. I was driving west on I-20 late at night. I was headed for El Paso. There's a long, empty stretch where there's nothing but desert and scrub brush. The kind of place for you to find out what feeling truly alone feels like. It was late, early, into the a.m., when my headlights caught something moving just up ahead. When I first laid eyes on it, I thought it was just a coyote crossing the road as it was running on all fours. But as I got a bit closer, my stomach almost hit the floorboard. This thing was not a coyote. It was something way bigger, and it wasn't running on all fours anymore, like it was when I first saw it. It had now somehow started running on its back 2 legs. I instinctively slowed down. My bright lights were lighting it up just as I reached the other side of the highway. This thing was easily over 6 feet tall. It was huge for an animal. It was covered in black and gray fur, and it had a massive head shaped like a wolf or a dog. Its eyes reflected the light shining a dull yellow. Just before this creature disappeared off the side of the road into the brush, it turned its head and looked straight at me. I don't know how to explain the feeling, but that look, it was like it knew that I saw it, like it was acknowledging me. Obviously, I didn't stop or pull over. I just kept trucking. I didn't even notice how hard I was gripping the steering wheel until my fingers started to lose circulation and started to tingle. The thought of that thing has haunted me for years. For the longest time, I never had a clue what it was I had ran into out there. That is until I stumbled across another Dogman channel, not yours, on YouTube. It has become perfectly clear to me after listening to so many of these stories that I did in fact see a dogman in Texas that night. I've been back on that stretch of highway after that a few times, actually. I'm always looking around that area with mixed feelings. Do I want to see a dogman again? Yeah, I'd like to see it again. Maybe if I see it a second time, that'll prove to myself that I'm not crazy. I appreciate your time. Sorry this was so short, but that's all that happened. Freddie. Allegheny National Forest, Pennsylvania, 1995. Hello, my name is Michelle, and I'm truly grateful for the opportunity to share this story with you and other people. I've always loved to go solo camping. There's just something about being alone in the middle of the woods that I always loved. Some people think it's weird, but I don't really care. I truly enjoyed it. Unfortunately, after this happened, I haven't been able to camp alone since. This thing took something that I love away from me, and now, forever, I'll resent these creatures just for that fact. On this camp, I was pretty deep in the Allegheny. All I had was my tent and just a small backpack with the common essential camping supplies. The first night I stayed out there was wonderful, but on the second night, that's when you could say I guess my luck finally ran out. I was actually inside my tent getting ready to go to sleep. I've experienced the woods going quiet before, but never like this. Everything was pretty loud, and then like snapping your fingers, it just stopped all at once. And as soon as it happened, every hair on my arms stood. I began hearing footsteps circling outside. These were not delicate, soft steps of a deer sneaking around. These were heavy, loud, something that was big enough to not care if its presence was known. I listened for the footsteps to circle back around to the front, and I quickly unzipped the tent and turned on my flashlight. I wanted to see what was out there. My light hit a bunch of trees, and then inside those trees, behind them, about 8 feet up, was a set of 2 huge glowing eyes looking in my direction. I just knew it was an owl, and I took a sigh of relief and continued to watch. Just as I had almost calmed myself down and giggled a bit for freaking out, that's when the creature stepped out from behind those trees. This was by far the largest animal I've ever seen. I made peace with God at that moment. I just knew this was about to be the end. Like I said, this thing was easily 8 feet tall. Its ears were pointed like a wolf. I could see its breath in the cold air. The first word that came to my mind was werewolf. I would only come to find later that they are known as dogmen. There was nothing I could do to fight this thing, so I just sit there waiting for my end, closing my eyes and praying, hoping that it would be as painless and quick as possible. I can't even describe how afraid I was in that moment. Then, as if my prayers were answered, At that very moment, as fast as that thing had shown itself, it disappeared back in the same trees that it came from. As soon as those eyes disappeared, the forest sounds returned. It was like this creature had a remote and could pause and unpause nature itself. I packed up then and there and left, headed straight back to my car, looking all around me the entire time. Not only have I never camped in Allegheny since, I've never been back there at all. I want nothing to do with those woods or that thing that's in there. Please stay safe, and thank you again for reading this. Michelle. St. Louis, Missouri, 2011. I had been a firefighter in St. Louis for nearly 6 years when this happened. I worked out of a smaller station near the city limits, where the calls weren't as frequent as downtown, but could be very unpredictable. I loved my job, but it came with long nights. Like I said, sometimes they were uneventful, but other times it would be pure chaos. The particular night here in question was quiet and boring, or so I thought. It was some time after 2 a.m. when I stepped outside for some fresh air. The air was cool. The streets were empty as I leaned back against the wall and closed my eyes for just a second. I heard something strange. There was a faint scraping sound. I thought it could possibly be the wind, but this was almost a deliberate rhythmic sound, like a person was making a noise to get someone else's attention. I looked up and my knees nearly buckled underneath me. This thing was perched on the roof of the firehouse, looking down straight from above me. It was this massive, hunched creature. I rubbed my eyes a few times, just refusing to believe what I was looking at. It looked like a wolf, but it wasn't. The way it crouched, its limbs, its legs were too long. Its ears were pointed forward, and it had a set of red, glowing eyes. I never saw the thing blink, not once. Its eyes were big. They were as round as, I don't know, a silver dollar, probably. I was used to being in tense situations. I don't know why, but I just couldn't move. It shifted its body weight slightly, and I could hear its claws clicking and scraping against the roof as it adjusted itself. And just as it was perfectly normal, it stood up to its full height, which was, I'm guessing, over 7 feet. It just watched me out of what seemed to be curiosity or just amusement, I'm not sure. Then, in one terrifyingly smooth motion, it jumped from the roof, not toward me, but completely across the street, disappearing behind another building. I pretty much threw myself inside, locking the door. I was in a state of panic and shock as I told my lieutenant what I'd just seen. He just laughed at me and told me I needed some sleep. But the next morning I checked the security cameras. There was definitely something on that roof. The video was too blurry to make out what it was, but I know what it was because I was out there to see it firsthand. Luckily, it never came back. Not while I was there, anyway. But I just couldn't look at the job the same after that. As you can imagine, firefighters see horrible things all the time. Wrecks, death, destruction. But this was something unnatural, unexplainable. I transferred to a different station the next year, but I've never stopped wondering, not for one day. What if it had jumped toward me instead of away from me? Anonymous. Asheville, North Carolina, 2017. Just call me Gordy. When this happened, I'd been working as a night security guard for a private high school in Asheville. I had been there for about a year. I didn't mind the job as it was pretty simple. It was mostly walking around, just checking the doors, making sure no one was sneaking onto the property. or vandalizing anything. The worst thing that I ever had to deal with was the occasional stray dogs or raccoons knocking over the trash cans. But on this night that I'm talking about here, I had to deal with something that wasn't supposed to be real. But it most certainly is. I'm not sure what time it was. It was sometime in the early morning, a couple hours before sunrise. I was doing my usual walk near the back of the gymnasium when I heard a scratching sound. Of course, I just thought it was an animal until I turned the corner. There, in the outer glow of the floodlights, was something that obviously shouldn't have been there. It looked like an animal, but it walked like a person. It was completely hunched over, and it was scraping at the metal doors of the gym with what appeared to be a massive clawed hand. It took a second for my brain to catch up with my eyes. It had long arms, it was very muscular, and its body was covered completely in black fur. It had these tall, pointed ears with tufts of hair on them. It had a huge, long canine snout. I noticed its legs down low were bent backwards like a dog as well. I couldn't help it, and I gasped. It was just a tiny sound. The thing froze, and it turned its head. But the way it turned, it was so slow that it made it even more terrifying for some reason. Its eyes were really bright yellow. I was completely paralyzed with fear. Then I watched as it curled its lips back, showing me these yellow teeth, and it growled. It was a low, rumbling, sickening growl. I was fumbling to grab my flashlight, but before I could get it and lift it up, the thing took off like a bullet. I've never seen any animal or human move like that. It darted off into the trees so fast that I barely saw it go. It was almost a blur. I just stood there trembling for what felt like an hour before I finally forced myself to move. I checked the door, and sure enough, there were these deep scratches. I lasted 2 more weeks at that job before I quit. I just couldn't do it anymore after that night. To this day, if I drive past that school, I get a very disturbing feeling in the pit of my stomach, like it's still there and it's watching me. Apparently, these things can show up anywhere, so watch yourself out there and take care. Godspeed. Gordy. 2022. Gary, Indiana. My name is Rob, and I work for the city doing maintenance on underground drainage tunnels. It's not really a high-paying job or anything, but it pays the bills. That's all that matters. Most of the time we're dealing with backed-up pipes, tons of trash, and a lot of rat problems. I've been doing this job for many years, and I thought I had seen everything that you could see doing this line of work. But I'm about to tell you something that I saw that made me question reality itself. I was working a late shift that night. I was alone, checking a tunnel near an industrial area. Everything was just routine until I heard something breathing down a tunnel. This wasn't your normal breathing either. This was raspy, almost like a growl. I completely stopped moving so I could hear better, and that's when I noticed a set of eyes in the dark. They were glowing like they were self-illuminated. These eyes were not shaped like a human or any animal for that matter. They were long, oval-shaped, and they were moving closer to me. But I didn't hear any sounds. I yanked my flashlight up and aimed it straight down the tunnel. Then that's the moment that I found out what those eyes belonged to. It was a massive canine-like head, and it was peeking around the bend. Its snout was long, its teeth were just too big, its fur, it was black, and it looked like it was matted and disgusting. But this is the worst part. It started moving. It pulled itself forward, its arms stretching, its fingers were splayed with long claws. It was moving in a twitchy, spasm-like movement. It was almost halfway crawling, half slithering. I'm proud of myself in that moment because I reacted instantly, which is probably the only thing that saved my life. Had I frozen or paused for a couple seconds, I fully believe that I would have disappeared that night. I dropped my tools and ran. I climbed the ladder so fast I felt the rungs digging into my palms. The moment I hit the surface, I slammed the cover shut and still didn't stop running until I was back at my truck. I told my supervisor there was something wrong down there, something in those tunnels, and he just laughed it off. But he did send another guy to check the next morning. He came back completely freaked out. He said some of the tunnels had been widened, like something had clawed them open. I stopped going underground completely after that. I requested a transfer to street-level maintenance, and I never looked back. It doesn't really matter, though, because now I know something is crawling around underneath the streets. And God help us all if there's more than one of those things down there. I almost know there has to be. But I want to make myself believe that that's not true. I really enjoy your channel, and I love the videos of the creek. The story tree is cool as well. Thank you for what you're doing. I think it's pretty awesome. I appreciate it, buddy. Stay safe and well. Rob. Well, legends, I hope y'all enjoyed tonight's compilation of encounters. I have a lot of these shorter emails, so I will probably do a few more uploads like this in the near future. To all these people that submitted these encounters, by no means does the length of your email take away from the terror or the trauma that you suffered from these encounters. I truly feel for all of you, and I hope that this has helped you deal with some of your pain. Thank you all for reaching out. You are truly appreciated and loved. And to all you that are still here and still listening, I want to thank you as well. Without you listening and continuing to support the channel, none of this would be possible. I'm hoping that by publicly sharing these encounters that it helps the submitters and possibly helps someone that may be listening as well. If you enjoyed this content, please consider subscribing to the channel if you're not already. And everyone, it would make me really happy if you would gently throat punch the like button on your way out. That's going to do it for tonight, y'all. I hope everyone out there is safe and blessed with nothing but the best. Until next time, my friends, watch over your loved ones. Keep your head on a swivel. And as always, good night.